I never thought I'd see my daughter standing in the middle of our driveway, her face streaked with tears, clutching her shirt to her chest as if she were trying to shield herself from the world. Her voice was trembling when she whispered, "Dad, she made me take it off." My stomach dropped, my vision blurred, and for a second I thought I'd misheard her. But I hadn't. The words burned into me like fire. She made me take it off. And the she wasn't some stranger, wasn't some bully from school. It was our neighbor, our HOA president, Karen. You probably think I'm exaggerating. How could anyone, let alone a middle-aged woman obsessed with property values, force a 15-year-old girl to change her clothes? But that's exactly what happened, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about community, decency, and safety in my own neighborhood. Before I tell you how it got that far, let me rewind. We'd moved into this subdivision because of its promises: safe streets, quiet nights, beautiful homes with trimmed lawns and smiling neighbors. The glossy brochures had shown kids riding bikes, dads grilling on their porches, moms laughing together under fairy lights. And for a while, I believed it. I wanted that dream so badly for my family. My daughter Emily had just turned 14 when we signed the papers. My wife Hannah said it was the perfect place for Emily and her little brother Daniel to grow up. Emily was the artist in the family, always sketching on scrap paper, always wearing shirts with paint stains or quirky designs she'd made herself. Daniel, a year younger, was quieter but sharp-eyed, the type of kid who noticed everything, the kind of detail-oriented boy you'd never want to underestimate. When we first arrived, the neighbors smiled, waved, and brought over welcome baskets. But even then, there was one woman whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name was Karen, the head of the HOA, and she wore authority like a crown. She had that clipped tone in her voice, like every word had been measured for efficiency and superiority. She didn't welcome us with cookies or flowers. She welcomed us with a rule book. "Just a few guidelines," she'd said, handing me a thick binder with tabs and highlighted notes. "We like to keep things orderly here." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of suburban joke, but her face didn't move. That's when I knew she wasn't kidding. At first, it was little things. Emily left her bike leaning against the garage instead of putting it inside, and Karen left a note: "All bikes must be stored out of view." Our grass grew half an inch too long, and another note appeared: "Lawns must be maintained weekly." Hannah planted sunflowers near the fence, and a letter came: "Only approved landscaping permitted." It was annoying, sure, but manageable. Every HOA has its quirks, right? I kept telling myself we'd adjust, that it was just part of suburban life. But what I didn't realize back then was that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was testing us, probing, pushing, waiting for the moment she could assert control over not just our home, but over us. The first real crack appeared one summer evening when Emily came downstairs in a t-shirt she'd designed herself. It had bold, bright swirls of paint across the front, messy and alive, just like her. She was so proud, showing it off as she twirled in the living room. Hannah and I clapped, Daniel gave her a thumbs up, and for a moment it felt like one of those perfect family scenes you see in commercials. Then Karen saw her. We were walking to the mailbox when Karen stopped us, her gaze fixed on Emily. "That shirt," she said, her lips tightening. "It's inappropriate for this neighborhood." I blinked. "Excuse me." Karen folded her arms. "We have standards here. Clothing should be tasteful, respectful. That shirt is loud, distracting. It lowers the image of the community." Emily froze, her cheeks turning red. I felt my blood pressure spike. "It's paint," I said. "It's art. My daughter made it herself." Karen smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides knives. "I'm not questioning her creativity. I'm telling you it's not acceptable. This is a family neighborhood." The way she said family made my stomach twist. Emily tugged at her shirt like she suddenly wanted to disappear. That night, she asked Hannah quietly, "Do I really embarrass people when I wear what I make?" Hannah hugged her and said no, but I saw the doubt in Emily's eyes. That was the beginning. Weeks turned into months, and Karen kept finding reasons to single out Emily. She called her skirts too short, even though they met school dress code. She said her jackets were too grungy. She even complained once about Emily's hair, saying blue streaks weren't neighborhood appropriate. I tried to brush it off, but I could feel the tension building, like static before a lightning strike. And then came the day. It was hot, the kind of oppressive summer heat that makes the air shimmer and the pavement burn. Emily had been invited to a friend's house just down the street, and she came downstairs wearing a loose t-shirt and jean shorts. Totally normal. Hannah handed her a bottle of water, and Daniel teased her about forgetting sunscreen. It was ordinary, warm, safe. But safe doesn't last when Karen's involved. I was in the garage tinkering with some tools when I heard voices outside, sharp, clipped, rising. I walked out wiping my hands on a rag, and that's when I saw it. Karen standing in front of Emily, one hand on her hip, the other pointing at my daughter's clothes. Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide. "This outfit is not permitted," Karen was saying. Emily stammered, "It's just shorts." "Too short," Karen snapped. "You're setting a bad example for the neighborhood. I can't allow it." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Can't allow it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "She's my daughter. You don't get to dictate her clothes." Karen didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed locked on Emily. "Go change right now." And then, God help me, she reached out and tugged at Emily's sleeve. Not hard, not violent, but enough to make Emily flinch back in shock. "You need to take it off and put on something appropriate," Karen said coldly. Emily's lips trembled. "Dad." I moved forward, but before I could reach them, Emily broke. She pulled the t-shirt over her head right there, left standing in her undershirt, her arms crossed over her chest, her face wet with tears. She wasn't obeying Karen because she agreed. She was obeying because she was terrified. I stood frozen, my rag clenched in my fist, rage flooding every vein. Karen actually smiled, satisfied, like she'd won some kind of battle. And that's when Daniel appeared, stepping out from the house, his voice steady and sharp in a way I'd never heard before. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Karen turned, startled. "Excuse me." Daniel's eyes burned. "You think you're untouchable because you run this neighborhood, but you don't know who's watching, you don't know who you just messed with." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Karen's smirk faltered. Emily was shaking. Hannah had come running by now, wrapping her arms around our daughter, glaring daggers at Karen. I didn't know what Daniel meant yet. I didn't know what he was holding back. But I was about to find out. Karen has just crossed the line, forcing Emily to change. Daniel hints at a secret weapon in the family, something Karen definitely doesn't see coming. Daniel's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Karen froze, blinking like she'd been slapped. For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and without another word, she turned and stormed back toward her house, her heels clicking hard against the pavement. I stood there, still shaking with rage, my mind spinning, but all I could focus on was my daughter, my little girl, sobbing into her mother's arms, clutching at her bare shoulders like she'd just been violated. And in a way, she had. Karen hadn't just embarrassed her, she'd stripped away her sense of safety in her own neighborhood. But as I carried Emily inside and Hannah fetched her another shirt, I couldn't stop replaying Daniel's voice in my head. He'd sounded so calm, so sure, so final, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. And that's when I remembered. Daniel wasn't just Emily's little brother. He was the one who always saw what others missed. Flashback to 2 years earlier. When Daniel was 13, our family had already been in the neighborhood for about a year. Karen had started her little crusade against Emily almost immediately, but back then it was more subtle, little digs, suggestions, and corrections. "You should tuck in your shirt, dear. You look sloppy otherwise." "Maybe you shouldn't paint your nails such a bright color. It doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." At first, Emily laughed it off. She was strong-willed, used to being unique. But even the strongest walls crack when the same hammer hits them over and over. And Daniel, he noticed. He'd sit at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, while his eyes flicked back and forth between Emily and Karen during those front yard encounters. He'd watch Emily's posture slump just a little lower, watch her smile fade a little faster, watch her hesitate before stepping outside. One night after dinner, I found Daniel scribbling furiously in a notebook. I thought it was homework, but when I peeked over his shoulder, I saw he wasn't writing equations or essays. He was writing down dates, times, and details. Karen told Emily her skirt was inappropriate, May 14th. Karen left another note about the bike, June 2nd. Karen blocked Emily at the mailbox and criticized her shoes, June 12th. "Why are you writing this?" I asked him. Daniel looked up at me, his eyes clearer and older than his years. "Because nobody believes kids when they say they're being targeted, but people believe records. If I keep track, someday it'll matter." That was my son, quiet, methodical, always 2 steps ahead. At the time, I didn't know what he planned to do with all that information. I figured maybe he'd turn it into a school essay on community life, or maybe he just needed a way to process what he was seeing. But I underestimated him. It wasn't just Emily who caught Karen's attention. Karen had favorites in the neighborhood, families she fawned over, kids she praised like royalty. If their lawns were messy, she overlooked it. If their children blasted music, she called it youthful energy. But for us, for Emily, it was different. One afternoon, we were at the neighborhood pool. Emily had worn a simple one-piece swimsuit, modest, nothing unusual. She was laughing, splashing with Daniel, when Karen strutted over in her oversized sun hat and dark glasses. "This is not an appropriate look for a young lady," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Emily froze, mortified. Daniel swam to the edge, his small hands curling into fists. I stood up from my lounge chair. "She's wearing a swimsuit, at a pool. What exactly is inappropriate about that?" Karen gave me that same smug smile. Some of us like to maintain standards of decency. Emily pulled her towel around herself and refused to go back in the water. That night, she cried in her room, whispering that she didn't even feel comfortable in her own skin anymore. Hannah tried to comfort her, but I could see the cracks spreading. And Daniel, he didn't cry, he didn't complain, he just added another entry to his notebook. The favoritism went deeper than just clothes and appearances. Karen would host community dinners and deliberately exclude Emily from conversations, praising other kids' achievements while ignoring her artwork entirely. I remember one night in particular. Emily had won a small art competition at her school. She brought her ribbon to the dinner, shy but glowing with pride. She tried to show Karen, and Karen barely glanced at it before turning to another boy at the table. "Now that's impressive," she said, pointing to his soccer trophy. "Sports build real character." Emily's ribbon drooped in her hand. Her smile dimmed. And Daniel watched silently, his pencil scratching the date and words into his book later that night. What nobody realized, least of all Karen, was that Daniel was building something bigger than a list. He was building a case. See, Daniel had always looked up to his older brother. Not Emily, his other brother, Marcus, the one who didn't live with us. Marcus was 15 years older than Daniel, my firstborn from a previous marriage, and though life had scattered us for a while, Marcus had never stopped being a mentor to his little siblings. Marcus wasn't just some guy with a job and a house. He was a judge, a real sitting county judge known for being sharp, fair, and relentless in his pursuit of justice. Daniel idolized him. He'd visit Marcus whenever he could, soaking up every story about court cases, evidence, and the importance of documentation. And somewhere along the way, Daniel decided to be Marcus's shadow. He started keeping records not just for Emily's sake, but because he understood, deep down, that someday those records might mean the difference between Karen's word and the truth. I didn't realize this until one evening when I found him on a video call with Marcus. Daniel had the notebook spread open, pointing to entries, reading them aloud. Marcus leaned forward on the screen, his brow furrowed, his expression deadly serious. "You're doing the right thing," Marcus told him. "Documentation is power, keep everything, don't leave anything out." Daniel nodded like a soldier receiving orders. And I suddenly understood. Daniel wasn't just a quiet kid with a sharp eye. He was preparing. Back in the present, after the driveway incident, after Emily had been humiliated in her own home, Hannah and I sat at the kitchen table long after the kids had gone to bed. Emily had cried herself to sleep. Daniel had disappeared into his room with his notebook. Hannah's hands trembled around her mug. "She touched her," she whispered. "She touched our daughter." I felt rage boil inside me all over again. She has no authority, no right. That woman thinks she runs the world. But Hannah wasn't looking at me. She was looking toward the hallway, where Daniel's light still glowed under his door. "He said she made a mistake," Hannah murmured. "What did he mean?" I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure if I should tell her about Marcus, about the late-night calls, about the files Daniel had been quietly building. I didn't want to put pressure on my son, didn't want him to carry that weight. But the truth was undeniable. Daniel knew something. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, calmly eating cereal, his notebook open beside him. His handwriting filled page after page, neat and meticulous. "Daniel," I said quietly, "last night, what did you mean?" He looked up at me, spoon halfway to his mouth, and for a moment I saw not a 14-year-old boy, but someone far older. Someone calculating, someone dangerous to the wrong people. I meant, he said evenly, that Karen thinks she's in control, but she is not anymore. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What are you planning to do? Daniel closed the notebook, his hand resting protectively on the cover. His lips curved into the faintest smile. You'll see. Daniel has been quietly preparing for years, armed with evidence and the mentorship of his older brother, Marcus, the judge. But he hasn't revealed his plan yet, leaving us and Karen dangling in suspense. The morning after the driveway incident, the house was eerily quiet. Emily didn't come down for breakfast, even after Hannah called her twice. Daniel sat at the table, spooning cereal into his mouth without looking up, that ever-present notebook next to his elbow. I was still seething, barely able to choke down my coffee. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily standing there half-dressed, her cheeks wet with tears while Karen smirked like a queen who just conquered new territory. I wanted to march across the street, pound on her door, and demand an apology. But the part of me that had lived here long enough knew what would happen. Karen would twist it, spin the story, and suddenly we would be the aggressors. That was her gift. She didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. Hannah brushed past me, clutching her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She's not going to school today, she said quietly. I blinked. What, why not? Hannah's eyes flicked toward the stairs. She doesn't want to face anyone. She thinks they'll all know that she's been humiliated. The words cut deeper than I expected. My Emily, who once walked into every room like she was carrying her own spotlight, now wanted to hide in the shadows. And all because of one woman. By the afternoon, Karen's poison had already spread. I was mowing the lawn when I noticed two of the neighborhood moms whispering by the mailboxes. One of them glanced at me, then quickly turned away. A group of kids rode by on bikes, laughing too loud, one of them muttering, "Trashy clothes," before they sped off. Karen had beaten me to it. She'd already spun the narrative. That evening, I found a folded letter taped to our front door. The HOA seal was stamped at the top, and in her unmistakable handwriting were the words, "This is a formal warning. Your daughter's attire yesterday violated community standards. Continued disregard for our guidelines will result in penalties. Please ensure all family members dress in a manner befitting the neighborhood." Penalties for clothing, for a 15-year-old girl who wanted nothing more than to be herself. I crumpled the letter in my fist, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. Daniel appeared in the doorway behind me, his voice low. "Keep it." I turned, still shaking. "What?" He nodded at the paper in my hand. "Don't throw it away. Everything she does, we need proof." I stared at him. Proof? Evidence? My son was speaking like a prosecutor, not a teenager. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Emily stopped sketching. The colored pencils that usually cluttered her desk lay untouched. She stopped going outside, too. Whenever she peeked through the blinds and saw Karen strolling down the street, her shoulders hunched, and she pulled the curtains shut. Hannah tried to coax her out of her room. "Honey, do you want to go to the mall this weekend? Just us girls." "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head. "What about painting? You haven't touched your canvas in weeks." Emily's voice cracked. "What's the point? She'll just say it's ugly." Hannah closed the door and leaned against the hallway wall, pressing her hands over her face. I could hear her muffled sobs through the plaster. And Daniel kept writing. At first, I thought he was just recording incidents, but one night when I peeked into his room, I saw more. He had files now, printed emails, copies of HOA rules, even photos he'd secretly taken of Karen leaving notes on our door. He had highlighted sections, arrows pointing to contradictions, lists of neighbors she'd punished versus neighbors she'd favored. This wasn't just a notebook anymore. This was a case file. I stepped into his room, my throat tight. "Daniel, where did you learn to do all this?" He looked up at me calmly. "Marcus taught me." The name hit me like a jolt. His older brother, the judge. Daniel gestured at the piles of evidence. "Marcus said if you want justice, you need to know more than your enemy. You need to know everything. Patterns, motives, hypocrisy." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands like he was 40 years old instead of 14. "Karen isn't just mean, she's dangerous, and if we don't stop her, she'll destroy Emily." I swallowed hard. So what's your plan? Daniel's eyes flickered with something sharp, something unshakable. You'll see. The breaking point came at the community meeting. Karen held them once a month in the clubhouse, a room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the pool next door and lemon-scented polish from the janitors. Neighbors gathered in folding chairs, sipping weak coffee from styrofoam cups, listening to Karen drone on about landscaping standards and approved paint colors. That night, Hannah didn't want to go. Emily stayed home, curled up in her room, but Daniel insisted we attend. She's going to use it against us, he said flatly. We need to be there. So we went. The meeting started normally, discussions about budget fence repairs, pool hours. Then Karen cleared her throat, flipping her notes. Lastly, I need to address an ongoing issue of dress code violations within our community, she said loudly, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed squarely on us. It is important that we maintain standards. Children, especially, must reflect the values of this neighborhood. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. She continued, unfortunately, there have been repeated instances of inappropriate clothing choices. Despite multiple warnings, the family in question has shown disregard for our guidelines. This behavior cannot continue. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping against the floor. Are you serious? You're calling out my 15-year-old daughter in front of the entire neighborhood. Karen tilted her head, her smile syrupy. I'm simply addressing the community's concerns. No, I snapped, my voice echoing. You're humiliating her, you're targeting her. Gasps scattered across the room. Karen's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. We all want what's best for our children, don't we? Sometimes that means guiding them toward better choices. I wanted to lunge across the room, but Hannah gripped my arm, whispering, don't. That's what she wants. And then, from the corner of the room, Daniel stood. The crowd hushed. He wasn't holding a notebook this time. He was holding a folder, thick, heavy, bulging with papers. Karen narrowed her eyes. Daniel, sweetie, why don't you sit down? No, he said firmly, his voice carrying farther than it should have. You've spent months humiliating my sister. You've called her names, written fake warnings, made her cry. You say you care about this neighborhood, but you only care about power. And I have proof. He slammed the folder onto the nearest table, papers spilling across it. Photos, letters, emails, all of it laid bare for the neighbors to see. Karen's face went pale. The room buzzed with whispers, people leaning in to look at the documents. Contradictions, favoritism, fabricated warnings, every dirty trick she'd pulled, cataloged and displayed. My chest swelled with both pride and dread. Pride because my son had just done what none of us dared. Dread because I knew this wasn't over. Karen's mask slipped for the first time, her lips curling in a snarl. You think you're clever? You think anyone going to believe a child over me? Daniel didn't flinch. He simply said, I don't need them to believe me, I just need them to believe him. The room went silent. Karen frowned. Him who? Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. Because everyone in that room could feel it, that something bigger was coming. Something Karen wasn't prepared for. Who is him, and what exactly is Daniel about to unleash on Karen? The courthouse was crowded the morning the trial began. Cameras flashed outside, reporters shoved microphones toward me, their voices overlapping with questions I didn't care to answer. To them, it was a sensational case. A neighborhood dispute turned violent, a wedding turned into a crime scene. To me, it was a wound that would never heal, no matter how many headlines were written or how many court sessions were held. Karen entered the courtroom like she owned it. Her lawyer walked by her side, and she wore that same smug smile, as if she believed this was just another minor inconvenience. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. A chief justice wasn't allowed to lose his composure, but a brother who had buried his sister wanted nothing more than to see her punished. The prosecutor laid out the case. The witnesses, the weapon, the video evidence from a guest's phone showing Karen raising her gun in the middle of the wedding. Each piece painted a clear picture, but Karen's defense tried to twist the story. They argued she felt threatened, that she believed the wedding guests were violating HOA rules, that she only fired out of fear. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, almost. I glanced at my mother in the front row. Her face was pale, her eyes tired from endless nights of grief. I knew she had come not for the trial itself, but for justice. She needed to see that the system she raised me to believe in still worked. She needed to know her daughter hadn't died in vain. Witness after witness testified, each voice shaking as they recounted the chaos of that night. My best man, still haunted by the sound of the gunshot. My cousin, who had carried my sister's body to the ambulance. My wife, her voice trembling as she described holding our baby tighter, unsure if the next bullet would take her too. And then came the moment I had dreaded. The defense called Karen to the stand. She strutted forward, sat confidently, and began spinning her tale. She talked about how the HOA had rules that were disrespected. She claimed we provoked her, that she acted in self-defense. Every word that left her mouth felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads. They weren't buying it, not entirely. But I knew better than to underestimate Karen. People like her thrived on manipulation, on bending truth until it resembled something else entirely. When the session ended for the day, I walked outside to a storm of cameras. One reporter shouted, "Do you think justice will be served?" I stopped, looked directly into the lens, and said, "Justice isn't optional, justice is inevitable." That night I sat alone in my office at home, surrounded by stacks of legal files. I wasn't officially on the case, but I knew every loophole, every defense tactic, every possible angle her lawyers might use. I couldn't intervene in court. I had to remain impartial as Chief Justice. But outside the walls of that courtroom, I was still a brother, and brothers fight differently. I began digging deeper into Karen's past. HOA complaints, past fines, altercations with neighbors, all of it painted a picture of a woman drunk on control. But then I found something more. Financial mismanagement in the HOA funds, missing money, documents signed by Karen that didn't match state regulations. Fraud. This wasn't just about a gunshot at a wedding anymore. This was about a pattern of corruption and abuse. She hadn't just taken my sister's life. She had been stealing from every family in that neighborhood for years. The thought lit a fire in me. If the court didn't bury her for murder, I would bury her with the truth of her greed. The next morning, I handed the files to a trusted investigator, someone who had worked under me for years and owed me his silence. "Find everything," I told him. "Every transaction, every lie. If she thinks she can manipulate the system, we'll show her the system can burn her whole empire down." As the trial continued, Karen's arrogance only grew. She smirked at the jury, whispered jokes to her lawyer, and even winked at me once, as though she thought she had already won. But I smiled back, not out of kindness, but because I knew something she didn't. Justice wasn't coming in one blow. Justice was coming in waves. And Karen was about to drown. The trial stretched into its second week, and tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Every morning, the courthouse was a battlefield. Families of neighbors packed into the gallery, some in support of justice, others in quiet fear of what Karen might reveal if she went down. For years, she had ruled the HOA like a tyrant. People followed her rules not because they agreed with them, but because they feared her wrath. Now, for the first time, she wasn't in control. But you wouldn't know it from looking at her. Karen walked into the courtroom each day with her head held high, shoulders back, as if she were the one presiding over the case. She locked eyes with me whenever she could, that same smug smile plastered across her face. It wasn't confidence, it was arrogance, the kind that comes from thinking you're untouchable. And maybe in her mind she was. The defense pushed their narrative harder. Karen was afraid. Karen was provoked. Karen was protecting her community. Their witnesses were carefully chosen, neighbors she had manipulated into believing she was their protector, people who owed her favors, or those too afraid to defy her. Some testified with shaking voices, saying things they didn't believe but couldn't afford not to say. But the prosecutor had facts. The video footage didn't lie. The weapon in her possession didn't lie. My sister's body, buried in the cold ground, didn't lie. Still, I could see the cracks forming. The jury shifted uneasily. Fear has a way of clouding judgment, and Karen knew it. If she could make them doubt just enough, she might walk free. That thought kept me awake at night. I wasn't just worried about justice slipping through the cracks of a system I had sworn to protect. I was furious. Furious that Karen had the audacity to twist my sister's death into some warped defense. Furious that she dared to smile while my family sat in mourning. Furious that she thought she could manipulate her way out of this like she had manipulated everyone else. And then my investigator returned. He placed a thick folder on my desk. Inside were pages of financial records, all pointing to one undeniable truth. Karen wasn't just a killer, she was a thief. She had been embezzling HOA funds for years, moving money through fake accounts, overcharging residents, and funneling the difference into her personal savings. Thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of dollars were gone. I stared at the papers, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just evidence, it was leverage. If the murder trial didn't bury her, the financial crimes would. But it wasn't enough for me to know. The world needed to see the real Karen, the greedy tyrant who preyed on the very people she claimed to protect. So I made a decision. I couldn't directly intervene in the trial without compromising my position, but I could ensure the truth came out. I forwarded the documents to the state attorney's office anonymously. I leaked pieces to the press through trusted channels, and slowly the story began to shift. The headlines were no longer just about the shooting, they were about corruption. Neighbors started speaking out, confessing how Karen had extorted them, threatened fines, and abused her power. The perfect image she had built over years began to crack, and behind it was something rotten and vile. When Karen walked into court the next day, her smile faltered for the first time. Reporters shouted questions about stolen funds, about embezzlement, about betrayal. Her lawyer scrambled to quiet the noise, but the damage was done. The jury heard the whispers. The public smelled blood. I sat in the gallery watching her squirm. For the first time, Karen looked small. That night, I visited my sister's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the moonlight casting shadows across the headstones. I knelt by her marker, tracing her name with my fingers. "Justice is coming, sis," I whispered. "Not just for what she did to you, but for everything she's ever done. She thought she could break us. She thought she could silence us. But we're louder than she ever imagined." A wind swept through the trees, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The next day in court, the prosecutor asked the judge for permission to admit new evidence. The defense objected furiously, claiming it was irrelevant. But when the financial documents were introduced, the room erupted. Karen's face drained of color. She shouted at her lawyer, her composure slipping for everyone to see. The jury watched closely, their expressions shifting. This wasn't the face of a woman acting in self-defense. This was the face of a woman who had been caught. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Karen's empire was collapsing around her. And I was only just getting started. The moment the financial records hit the courtroom, everything shifted. What had once been a murder trial framed around community safety now became something much uglier, much more damning. Karen's empire of lies and intimidation began unraveling thread by thread, and for the first time since my sister's death, I could see the light breaking through the cracks. But the fight was far from over. Karen's attorney scrambled, objecting, yelling, trying to spin the new revelations as a smear campaign. The jury wasn't buying it. They leaned forward in their seats, listening closely, their eyes darting between the prosecutor and Karen's increasingly frantic face. My brother, Judge Matthew, had been quiet all through the proceedings. His role as presiding judge came later, after the mistrial motion was filed because of the jury's sudden intimidation rumors. Karen's side thought they could get a new trial, perhaps even a friendly judge. Instead, fate delivered her the last person she ever expected, my brother. When he walked into the courtroom in his black robe, the hush was deafening. Karen's jaw nearly hit the floor. She knew exactly who he was. For years, she had sneered at my family, treated us like lesser beings under her HOA rule. She had dragged my daughter through the mud, humiliated her in front of neighbors, and sneered when we resisted. And now, the brother of the very man she had tried to destroy sat at the bench, gavel in hand. Her lawyer rose to object, demanding recusal. "Your Honor, you cannot possibly preside over this case with impartiality. This is a clear conflict of interest." My brother's voice was calm but sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "The law provides procedures for reassignment. I have been vetted, approved, and assigned by the state. This court will proceed." Karen's face twisted. It was the first time I saw her truly afraid. The days that followed were grueling. Witness after witness took the stand. Neighbors who had been silent for years finally found the courage to speak. A retired couple admitted Karen had threatened to have their grandkids expelled from school if they didn't follow HOA decorum. A single mother broke down in tears as she described how Karen fined her thousands for unauthorized Christmas decorations, just so she could pocket the money. But the most powerful testimony came from my daughter. When she took the stand, my chest tightened. She was only 15, but her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. She described the humiliation of being forced by Karen to change her clothes at a neighborhood pool party, how Karen had grabbed her wrist, dragged her into the clubhouse bathroom, and locked the door. "I was crying," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the jury. "I told her I wanted to go home, that my dad was waiting for me. She told me I looked like trash, that I was embarrassing the community. She wouldn't let me leave until I put on the clothes she gave me." The courtroom was silent. You could hear every sniffle, every breath. My hands trembled on the wooden bench. Karen's lawyer tried to cross-examine her to trip her up with technicalities, but my daughter never wavered. She told the truth. She looked at Karen directly, and in that moment she wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She was a witness. The jury's faces hardened. That night, my brother called me into his chambers. His expression was heavy, the kind of look only a judge wears when the weight of justice presses down on him. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "She's finished." "Not yet," he said. "She'll fight to the very end, and when people like her are cornered, they're at their most dangerous." He was right. The next morning, Karen pulled a stunt that nearly derailed everything. Her lawyer announced that Karen wished to make a personal statement. Against advice, against protocol, she insisted. She stood before the jury, tears streaming down her face, playing the victim. She spun a story about being misunderstood, about how she had dedicated her life to the community, how she loved every child like her own. She claimed my daughter had been dressed inappropriately, and that she acted only to protect the moral fabric of the neighborhood. The audacity made my stomach churn. Then came the dagger. She accused my family of conspiring against her, claiming my brother was using his position as judge to orchestrate her downfall. "This isn't about justice," she sobbed. "This is about revenge." For a moment, I felt the room shift. Doubt crept in. She was good, too good. But then my brother leaned forward, his voice steady. "This court does not operate on emotion or manipulation. It operates on truth. And the truth," he said, glancing toward the evidence table, "is written in every document, every testimony, every fact presented here." His words cut through her theatrics like lightning. The prosecutor then played the final card. Surveillance footage recovered from a neighbor's door camera. The grainy video showed Karen dragging my daughter by the wrist into the clubhouse that day. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed in the recording. "You'll do what I say, or your family will pay the price." The jury's faces froze. Karen collapsed into her seat, her mask finally shattered. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but my ears were pounding too hard to hear them. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear, they were from relief. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. "It's over," I whispered. But deep inside, I knew we still had one step left. The verdict hadn't been read yet, and until that gavel struck, nothing was guaranteed. As the jury filed out for deliberation, I stared at Karen. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. For years, she had terrorized us with that smug smile, with that voice of authority. Now, stripped of power, she looked like nothing more than a frightened woman cornered by her own lies. And I couldn't help but wonder, would justice finally be served? Or would the system once again fail the people who needed it most? The jury deliberated for what felt like a lifetime. Hours ticked by, the hands of the courtroom clock moving with cruel slowness. Every creak of the bench beneath me felt like thunder. My daughter held my hand the entire time, her grip tight, as if letting go might undo everything. My brother, sitting in his black robe, betrayed no emotion. But I knew him. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles tight against the gavel. Finally, the bailiff opened the door. The jury filed in solemn, avoiding eye contact with everyone. My chest tightened. The foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that carried the weight of our lives. On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty. On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. And then the final blow. On the charge of second-degree murder, guilty. My knees nearly buckled. My daughter let out a sob, clutching me tightly. The courtroom erupted, half in gasps, half in relief. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My brother's voice rang clear as he struck the gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" He let the noise die before delivering the sentence. Karen Reynolds, you are hereby remanded to state custody to serve a sentence not less than 40 years. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck, and with it, Karen's reign of terror ended. I thought I would feel triumph, a rush of victory, but instead a heavy silence settled in my chest. Justice had been served, yes, but my sister was still gone. No verdict could bring her back. My daughter's scars, emotional and otherwise, would take years to heal. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved toward me, questions shouted. How do you feel? Do you think justice was done? What will you do now? I said nothing. I held my daughter's hand and walked past them all. This wasn't their story to exploit. It was ours to survive. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. For the first time in years, our neighborhood felt free. People painted their houses without fear of fines. Kids played in the streets without whispered threats. Families hung decorations without looking over their shoulders. The ghost of Karen's authority slowly faded, replaced by something like hope. But inside our home, the wounds lingered. My daughter suffered nightmares, waking in tears, afraid Karen would somehow return. I enrolled her in therapy, and though at first she resisted, slowly she began to open up. One night she came into my room and whispered, "Dad, I don't feel afraid all the time anymore." I held her tightly, tears soaking my shirt. That moment meant more than any verdict ever could. As for me, I faced my own demons. Guilt clawed at me, guilt for not protecting my sister, for not seeing Karen's cruelty sooner, for letting her get so close to my family. My brother reminded me often, the law isn't about preventing pain, it's about responding when pain is inflicted. You did everything you could. Still, some nights I replayed it all in my head, wishing I could go back and stop it before it ever happened. Karen, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. In prison, her empire crumbled entirely. Those who once feared her now mocked her name. Her stolen wealth was seized, her reputation shattered beyond repair. She had traded her freedom for greed and cruelty, and now she lived in the cage she had built for others. One day, months after the trial, my daughter and I visited my sister's grave together. The air smelled of fresh rain, the earth damp beneath our feet. My daughter knelt by the stone, brushing away leaves. "She'd be proud of you," I whispered. My daughter nodded. "And of you too, Dad, you didn't give up." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Neither did you." We stood there in silence, hand in hand, the weight of the past heavy but no longer unbearable. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. But peace came with a lesson carved deep into my heart. Evil doesn't always come in shadows. Sometimes it comes smiling, dressed in authority, hiding behind rules and regulations. Sometimes it sits across the street in a house with perfect hedges and manicured lawns. And if we let it go unchecked, it grows, feeding on silence until it takes something precious from us. I learned that truth and loyalty aren't enemies, they're partners. Protecting family doesn't mean hiding the truth. It means fighting for it, no matter how hard, no matter the cost. My daughter asked me once, "Dad, do you think she'll ever be sorry?" I looked at her at the strength she'd found in her brokenness and shook my head. Maybe, but her sorry doesn't matter. What matters is that we survived, that we fought back, and that she can't hurt anyone else again. We walked back to the car, the sun breaking through the clouds, warm on our faces. Life would never be perfect again, but it would go on. And maybe, just maybe, we'd find joy again in the little things, like laughter at the dinner table, the smell of cookies baking, or the sound of my daughter singing when she thought no one was listening. Because in the end, that's what Karen couldn't take from us. Not our love. Not our resilience. Not our future. If you were in my shoes, would you have fought Karen the same way or handled it differently? Do you believe justice was truly served? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the stories we share are the only way we heal.